I watched my ex-best friend's jaw drop when I walked into her wedding uninvited. The same woman who called me not good enough for their circle was now staring at the billionaire holding my hand. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planned. It's just living your best life. If you've ever been excluded, underestimated, or told you don't belong, this story will remind you that your worth isn't determined by others. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances, and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Now, let me tell you how I went from heartbreak to happiness. My name is Jasmine, and 2 years ago, I thought I knew what friendship meant. I had been best friends with Rebecca since our sophomore year in college. We did everything together: late-night study sessions, weekend road trips, celebrating each other's victories, and crying through the defeats. When we graduated, I genuinely believed we'd be friends for life. But life has a funny way of showing you people's true colors when the stakes get higher. Rebecca came from money. Not just comfortable money, but the kind of generational wealth that opens doors before you even knock. After college, she moved back to her hometown and quickly became the center of a social circle that looked nothing like the diverse group we hung out with in school. Her new friends were all from similar backgrounds, wealthy, well-connected, and honestly, mostly white. At first, I didn't think much of it. People grow and change, right? But slowly, I started noticing things. The group dinners I wasn't invited to, that I'd see on Instagram later. The casual comments about my hair, my clothes, the way I talked. Rebecca would laugh it off and say they were just joking, but their jokes always seemed to have the same target. The breaking point came when Rebecca got engaged to Preston, a guy whose family owned half the commercial real estate in the city. I was genuinely happy for her. We'd spent countless nights talking about our dream weddings, and I'd always imagined being right there beside her when her moment came. When she called to tell me about the engagement, I was the first person she reached out to after her family. We cried together over FaceTime, and she told me how she couldn't wait for me to be her maid of honor. For a moment, it felt like we were back in our dorm room, planning our futures and promising to be there for each other no matter what. The wedding planning started immediately. Rebecca's mother hired the most expensive planner in the state, and everything had to be perfect. I offered to help with whatever she needed, but every time I suggested something, there was always a reason why it wouldn't work. My ideas were either too casual, too colorful, or just not quite right for the vision they had. Months went by, and I kept waiting for my bridesmaid dress fitting, for the bachelorette party planning, for any of the things that come with being in a wedding party. But the calls became less frequent, and when we did talk, Rebecca seemed distracted and distant. Then came the day that changed everything. I was scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break when I saw it. Rebecca had posted a beautiful photo of her and her bridesmaids at their dress fitting. 6 women in flowing lavender dresses, all smiling and holding champagne glasses. I stared at that photo for probably 10 minutes, looking for myself in it, thinking maybe I'd missed the invitation somehow. But I wasn't there. My hands were shaking when I called her. "Hey, Becca," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saw your post. The dresses are beautiful." There was a pause, a long, uncomfortable pause that told me everything I needed to know. "Oh, Jasmine," she said, and I could hear the guilt in her voice. "I've been meaning to call you. We had to make some really tough decisions about the wedding party." "Tough decisions," I repeated. "You know how it is. Preston's family is very traditional, and we had to keep the numbers small. Plus, we wanted everything to flow together perfectly." Flow together. I knew exactly what that meant. "What about being your maid of honor?" I asked. "What about all those conversations we had?" Rebecca sighed. "Things change, Jasmine. We're not in college anymore. This wedding is important for Preston's family business, and everything has to be just right." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. But the hurt was just beginning. A week later, I found out through another mutual friend that not only was I not in the wedding party, I wasn't even invited to the wedding. Rebecca had told everyone that they were keeping it small, family only. But then she posted about adding Preston's business associates and distant relatives to the guest list. The final blow came when I overheard a conversation at a coffee shop. Rebecca was there with two of her bridesmaids, and they didn't see me sitting in the corner with my laptop. I heard Rebecca's voice clearly as she said, I love Jasmine, but she just wouldn't fit the aesthetic we're going for. Preston's family has certain expectations. I sat there for another hour after they left, staring at my untouched coffee and trying to process what I'd heard. Aesthetic. That's what our 8-year friendship had been reduced to. That night, I cried harder than I had since my father died. Not just because of Rebecca, but because of what her rejection represented. All those little comments, all those times I'd been excluded, all those moments when I'd felt like I was on the outside looking in. It all made sense now. But sometimes rock bottom becomes the foundation for something beautiful. I threw myself into work after that. I was working for a small tech startup downtown, and I decided that if I couldn't control how other people saw me, I could at least control my own success. I stayed late, took on extra projects, and slowly started to rebuild my confidence. 3 months after the wedding invitation disaster, I was working late on a particularly stressful project when I realized I desperately needed coffee. There was a little cafe a few blocks from my office that stayed open until 10, and I'd become a regular there during my hermit phase. I was so focused on my phone, trying to solve a coding problem while walking, that I didn't see the man coming out of the cafe until I crashed right into him. Coffee went everywhere, on his shirt, on my jacket, on the sidewalk. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I said, frantically looking for napkins. I wasn't watching where I was going. "Hey, it's okay," he said, and when I looked up, I was struck by how calm he seemed. Most people would have been annoyed, but he was actually smiling. Coffee accidents happen to the best of us. He was tall, with warm brown eyes, and the kind of smile that made you want to smile back. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and jeans. Nothing fancy, but something about the way he carried himself suggested confidence without arrogance. "Let me buy you a new coffee," I insisted. "And maybe pay for dry cleaning for your shirt." "Only if you let me buy you one too," he said. "I'm Daniel, by the way." "Jasmine," I replied. And when he shook my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Genuine connection. We ended up sitting in that cafe until it closed, talking about everything and nothing. He was reading the same book I'd just finished, and we spent 20 minutes debating the ending. He ordered the same ridiculously complicated coffee drink that I did, oat milk latte with an extra shot and a dash of cinnamon. When I mentioned that I was working late on a project, he didn't immediately ask what I did for money or try to impress me with his own job. He just listened. "What's your project about?" he asked, and I found myself explaining the app we were developing, how it was designed to help small businesses manage their finances more efficiently. His questions were thoughtful and showed he was actually paying attention. When we finally left the cafe, Daniel walked me to my car, even though his was parked in the opposite direction. "Would you maybe want to have dinner sometime?" he asked. "Somewhere with less potential for coffee disasters." I hadn't been on a date since before the Rebecca situation, but something about Daniel felt safe, easy. "I'd like that," I said. Our first real date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown. Daniel showed up with a single sunflower, which made me laugh because it was so unexpected. "Roses felt too serious for a second meeting," he explained. "But sunflowers are happy. They remind me of your smile." That night, we talked for hours. Daniel told me he worked in business, but kept the details vague, which I appreciated. Too many guys led with their job titles and bank accounts. Instead, he wanted to know about my dreams, my family. What made me laugh? When I told him about growing up with a single mom who worked 2 jobs to put me through college, he didn't change the subject or look uncomfortable like some people did. "Your mom sounds incredible," he said. "It takes real strength to raise a child on your own and still encourage them to chase their dreams." 2 months into dating Daniel, I realized I was falling in love. Not the desperate, anxious kind of love I'd felt in previous relationships, but something steady and sure. Daniel made me feel valued in a way I'd never experienced. He remembered little things I mentioned in passing. He showed up when he said he would. He celebrated my victories at work and listened when I had bad days. One evening, we were cooking dinner together in his apartment. Nothing fancy, just pasta and a salad. When my favorite song came on his playlist, without saying anything, Daniel took my hand and spun me around his kitchen. We danced badly, laughing and bumping into counter corners. And when the song ended, he pulled me close and kissed me for the first time. It was the kind of kiss that makes everything else disappear. Soft and certain and full of promise. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, he whispered against my forehead. What took you so long? I whispered back. That weekend, Daniel surprised me with a trip to Napa Valley. I know you've been stressed about the product launch, he said. I thought you could use a change of scenery. The drive up was beautiful. Windows down, music playing, Daniel's hand holding mine whenever he wasn't shifting gears. We stayed at this charming bed and breakfast, surrounded by vineyards. And for the first time in months, I felt completely relaxed. On our last morning there, Daniel had arranged for us to take a hot air balloon ride. As we floated above the valley, watching the sun rise over endless rows of grapevines, he took my hand and said, "You know, before I met you, I thought I had my life figured out. But you've changed everything, Jasmine. You've made me want things I didn't even know I was missing." Like what? I asked. Like dancing in kitchens, like someone to share sunrises with, like building something real with someone who sees the world the way you do. That night, over dinner at a tiny restaurant, with candles on every table and stars visible through the windows, we said, "I love you" for the first time. Not just the words, but the weight of them, the promise they carried. 6 months into our relationship, I started noticing things about Daniel that suggested he had more money than he let on. His apartment was modest, but in an expensive building. He never seemed worried about money. And when I mentioned wanting to visit my mom, but not being able to afford the plane ticket, he casually offered to cover it without making me feel like charity. One night, I finally asked him directly, "Daniel, what exactly do you do for work?" He got quiet for a moment, then said, "I own a company." Actually, several companies. I started my first tech business in college, and things kind of snowballed from there. "What kind of snowball are we talking about?" I asked. He laughed nervously. "The kind that gets written about in Forbes magazine sometimes." That's when I learned that the man I'd been falling in love with was Daniel Chen, founder and CEO of 3 different tech companies, with a net worth that most people only see in movies. He'd been living simply on purpose, he explained, because he'd dated too many people who were more interested in his bank account than his personality. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. "Because I wanted you to fall in love with me, not my resume," he said. "And honestly, I was terrified that if you knew, everything would change." But it didn't change anything. If anything, it made me love him more, knowing that he'd chosen to be vulnerable with me, that he'd trusted me with the truth. For our 6-month anniversary, Daniel surprised me with dinner on a rooftop overlooking the city. He'd somehow managed to fill the entire space with sunflowers and string lights, and there was a small table set for 2 in the center of it all. "How did you do all this?" I asked, spinning around to take it all in. "I may have called in a few favors," he said, pulling out my chair. "You deserve beautiful things, Jasmine. You deserve to be celebrated." That night, as we danced under the stars, with the city lights spread out below us, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world, not because of the money or the grand gestures, but because Daniel saw me, really saw me, and loved what he found. Which is why what happened next was so perfectly ironic. I was mindlessly scrolling through social media one evening when Rebecca's wedding posts started flooding my feed. The wedding was happening in 2 weeks, and apparently it was going to be the social event of the season. I felt a familiar pang in my chest, but it was duller now, more like an old bruise than a fresh wound. You okay? Daniel asked, looking up from his laptop. Just seeing posts about my ex-best friend's wedding, I said. The one I told you about. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Rebecca Morrison, right? The one marrying Preston Whitfield. I looked at him in surprise. You know them? Preston's family does business with one of my companies, he said carefully. I actually got an invitation to the wedding. I wasn't planning to go. Small world, I said. But something in his expression made me curious. What kind of business? They own a lot of commercial real estate. We lease several of our office buildings from them. He closed his laptop and moved to sit next to me on the couch. Are you thinking about the wedding? Not really, I said, which was mostly true. I mean, it still hurts sometimes, but I'm happy now, happier than I've ever been. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, then said, "What if we went together?" "What?" "To the wedding." "What if we went together?" I stared at him. "Daniel, that's crazy. I wasn't invited, remember?" "You'd be my plus one," he said simply. "I have an invitation, and I'm allowed to bring a guest. But why would you want to go? You said you weren't planning to attend." He took my hands in his. "Because I love you, and because I think it might be good for you to face this with your head held high. Not for revenge or to prove anything to them, but for closure. To show yourself how far you've come." The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. Part of me wanted to stay as far away from Rebecca's wedding as possible. But another part of me, the part that had been healing over these past months, was curious about who I'd be in that room now. "You really think we should go?" I asked. "I think you're an incredible woman who deserves to take up space anywhere she wants to be," Daniel said. "And if being there with me helps you remember that, then yes, I think we should go." The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of my closet for an hour trying to decide what to wear. Finally, Daniel knocked on my bedroom door. "Can I come in?" I was holding up two dresses, neither of which felt right. "I don't know what I'm doing," I said. "This is a terrible idea." Daniel walked over and pulled a third dress from my closet, a emerald green wrap dress that I'd bought months ago, but never worn because it felt too fancy for my usual life. "This one," he said. "It brings out your eyes, and it's the color of strength." As I got ready, Daniel sat on my bed, occasionally offering encouragement, but mostly just being present. When I was struggling with my necklace clasp, he came over to help. "Wait," he said, and disappeared into the living room. He came back with a small velvet box. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this." Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant shaped like a sunflower. "It was my grandmother's," he said softly. "She always told me to give it to someone who made me want to be better than I thought I could be." As he fastened it around my neck, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't going to this wedding as someone seeking validation or trying to prove her worth. I was going as a woman who had found real love and learned to value herself. "Ready?" Daniel asked, offering me his arm. "Ready," I said, and meant it. The wedding was being held at the most exclusive country club in the city, the kind of place where membership was passed down through generations. As we pulled up in Daniel's Tesla, I felt my nerves spike. "Second thoughts?" Daniel asked, squeezing my hand. "A few," I admitted. "We can leave whenever you want," he said. "But Jasmine, I want you to remember something. You're not the same person who got hurt by Rebecca's rejection. You've grown. You've built a life. You've learned to love and be loved. That's not something anyone can take away from you." Walking into that venue on Daniel's arm was surreal. I recognized so many faces from Rebecca's social media posts. People who had been at gatherings I wasn't invited to, who had been part of conversations that excluded me. But instead of feeling small, I felt neutral, like I was observing a world that I'd once desperately wanted to be part of, but no longer needed. The ceremony was beautiful, I had to admit. Rebecca looked stunning in her designer gown, and Preston seemed genuinely happy. As they exchanged vows, I found myself thinking about the friendship we'd once had, the late nights and shared dreams, and feeling sad for what we'd lost rather than angry about how it ended. After the ceremony, we moved to the reception. That's when people started recognizing Daniel. I watched as business associates and other guests approached our table, treating him with the kind of deference that comes with serious wealth and influence. "Daniel Chen, I didn't expect to see you here," said a man I didn't recognize. "Preston and I do business together," Daniel replied politely, his hand never leaving mine. "This is my girlfriend Jasmine." I watched as the man's demeanor shifted slightly when Daniel introduced me not as his date or his plus one, but as his girlfriend. In this world, I realized I had value because Daniel valued me. It was during the dancing that Rebecca finally approached us. Daniel had just spun me around to our favorite song, and we were laughing about something silly when I looked up and saw her standing there. "Jasmine," she said, and her voice was different than I remembered, smaller, somehow. "Hi, Rebecca," I said, stepping slightly closer to Daniel. "Congratulations, the wedding is beautiful." "Thank you." She looked nervous, glancing between Daniel and me. I didn't know you'd be here." "Daniel was invited," I said simply. "I'm his guest." Rebecca's eyes widened as she clearly put together who Daniel was. Oh wow, I didn't realize you two were together," Daniel supplied, his arm tightening slightly around my waist. "We've been together for 8 months now." That's wonderful," Rebecca said, but she looked like she was going to be sick. "Jasmine, I've been meaning to call you. I feel terrible about how things ended between us." "Do you?" I asked, and there was no anger in my voice, just genuine curiosity. "Yes," she said quickly. "I made some really bad decisions, and I hurt you, and I'm sorry." I looked at this woman who had once been my closest friend, who had shared my secrets and dreams, who had ultimately decided I wasn't worth keeping around, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even really sadness anymore. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I hope you're happy, Rebecca. I really do." Are you happy?" she asked, and there was something almost desperate in her voice. I looked at Daniel, who was watching this exchange with patient support, ready to step in if I needed him, but trusting me to handle it myself. I thought about our morning coffee rituals, our weekend farmers market trips, the way he celebrated my work, victories like they were his own. I thought about dancing in his kitchen and falling asleep reading next to each other and building something real together. "Yes," I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said all day. "I'm very happy." Rebecca nodded, tears in her eyes. "Good. That's good. You deserve to be happy." After she walked away, Daniel and I finished our dance in comfortable silence. As the song ended, he pulled me close and kissed my forehead. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Free," I said, and realized it was true. We left the wedding early, stopping to pick up ice cream on the way home. As we sat on Daniel's couch, still in our fancy clothes, but with our shoes kicked off and ice cream containers between us, I felt overwhelmingly grateful. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For seeing me, for loving me, for helping me remember who I am." Daniel set down his ice cream and took my hands. "Jasmine, I need you to understand something. I didn't fall in love with you because you're beautiful, although you are. I didn't fall in love with you because you're smart, although you are. I fell in love with you because of how you make me want to be better, because you're kind without being naive, strong without being hard, ambitious without being cruel. You don't need anyone to validate your worth, including me." 6 months later, Daniel proposed in the same coffee shop where we'd first met. He'd somehow convinced the owner to let him set up a small display of sunflowers, and he'd hidden the ring inside a copy of the book we'd discussed that first night. "I've been carrying this around for weeks," he said, down on one knee, while other customers pretended not to stare, waiting for the perfect moment. But then I realized the perfect moment isn't about the setting. It's about being with the person who makes every moment feel perfect. Our wedding was everything Rebecca's wasn't. Small, intimate, filled with people who genuinely cared about us. My mom walked me down the aisle, crying happy tears and whispering about how proud my father would have been. Daniel's grandmother, who had flown in from Taiwan, told me I was exactly the kind of woman she'd prayed her grandson would find. Rebecca sent a card, apologizing again and expressing genuine happiness for our marriage. I wrote her back, thanking her and meaning it. Her rejection had hurt, but it had also set me free to find something real. Now, 2 years later, Daniel and I are building a life together that's better than anything I could have imagined. We travel together, work together on projects we're passionate about, and yes, we use our resources to help other women who've been told they don't belong. We started a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, and we mentor young entrepreneurs who don't have family connections to help them navigate the business world. But the real treasure isn't the money, or the influence, or even the work we do together. It's the quiet moments. It's Daniel bringing me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. It's dancing in our kitchen while dinner cooks. It's knowing that I'm loved, not despite who I am, but because of who I am. Sometimes I think about the woman I was 2 years ago, desperate for Rebecca's approval and willing to accept scraps of friendship from people who didn't value me. That woman deserved love too, but she didn't know it yet. She thought her worth was determined by other people's opinions, by whether she fit into rooms she was never meant to be in. The truth is, Rebecca did me the biggest favor of my life. When she showed me who she really was, she freed me to find my people, my person, my place in the world. And for that, I'm actually grateful. Sometimes the people who don't see your worth do you the biggest favor by showing their true colors. My story reminds us that when someone shows you who they are, believe them, and then go live your best life. If this story inspired you, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember their worth. Subscribe for more stories about love, growth, and second chances. What's your biggest comeback story? Share it in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth.